Hello, my name is Janine Ryan and I'm the editor of Farmers Weekly magazine. Thank you for joining me for this roundtable discussion on the budget speech which was delivered on the 12th of March 2025 by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. This, of course, was after the budget speech was postponed from February when it was meant to be initially delivered. The budget speech has garnered lots of different reactions. There have been mixed reactions from opposition parties to the ANC as well as agri stakeholders. Here to unpack all of this with me today, we have three experts. So let's start, I think, with something a little lighter, perhaps, which is what were your initial reactions upon hearing the budget speech? Start with you.
Thanks, Janine. So look, I mean, initially when we looked at the budget speech itself, first thing that came to mind was just Winston Churchill's say, when he says you can't get into a bucket and expect to lift yourself up using the handles. Essentially meaning that you cannot be taxing yourself into growth or any reforms. That's my first initial impression of the budget when I looked at it. However, with now having enough time to actually study a little bit further, we realized that National Treasury did have a difficult time. They had a lot to balance out. And given the climate that we are in, I think it was a fairly balanced budget. Some controversial things that came out of the budget, obviously, if you think about that, but also some significant wins, particularly if you consider just on capital expenditure that has been announced, which is what we've been crying for the longest of times. We've been saying South Africa needs to be a construction site. And I think it's quite encouraging to see that. So I guess just looking at just the balance that needed to play out, National Treasury did the best that they could at the time. However, there's still big risks that lie ahead.
Yeah, I think just to add on what he said is that my sense is that the budget was a little bit for most people and a little bit for most sectors. So we have got public infrastructure that has been allocated, which is significant because public infrastructure has got a crowding in effect of private investment, and then you have got the poultry guys and livestock. They got no VAT increase in terms of the VAT exemption. The budget was a little bit for a lot of sectors in the economy. Public sector, public investment was prioritized. The poultry master plan was supported as well, and so is the sugar master plan. So I think on that front, I would say that there was a balancing act with the different sectors receiving interest on the budget.
Yeah, I think principally what is important is that the commitment to fiscal discipline, despite the challenges, that commitment ensures that South African Inc. remains an investable destination. There's always, in trying times, to try some experiments, and we know what happens in laboratories when experiments are done. There's bound to be some explosions. So the commitment to fiscal discipline, is important. I do not want to take for what my colleagues have already said, but it was a tight balancing act. But what is also important is that it also brought about, because it went back as a result of the rejection of the initial proposal. What that unearthed is the level to which there's clarity around the process and who's involved, etc. And that is important. That views are brought in, and that you would clarify the process itself, the detail at which you go around this. And what is important is that the underlying issue here is that growth will get us out of this trouble. And this should not be a piecemeal attempt at getting growth. And what is important from the budget is the elements that addresses the question of growth, despite the fact that you're increasing that. To what extent are you, channeling your efforts towards uplifting growth, and that is very critical, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we're saying who doesn't get bread tonight, who doesn't get milk, and so on and so on. In future, we should be talking about allocation of what is being collected to grow the economy more.
Indeed.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the finance minister's position. I think it is a very difficult balancing act because we have so many people who still live in dire poverty. So it's almost an impossible balancing act, actually, in fact. So I think the major controversy around the budget and its initial postponement, of course, was the recommendation of a 2% increase in VAT for this financial year. The DA obviously it wasn't going to support that, and so the budget had to be postponed after in order to have more discussions about it. So now VAT has been increased, but only by 0.5 percentage point for this financial year, and then another 0.5 percentage point for the following financial year. Just in terms of, obviously it's going to have an impact on consumers, particularly poorer consumers who are already struggling perhaps to actually afford food. But from an agricultural perspective, what kind of impact would this have on, let's say, smaller farmers or emerging farmers who are not VAT registered, so they can't claim back VAT? Will this have some sort of impact on inputs that farmers buy? If you could just elaborate perhaps on that. Start with you.
Great. I think it's very important just to contextualize the reason why we saw that VAT increase, or even just the proposal thereof. If you just consider that public sector wages have grown at a rate that was not budgeted for previously, so government needed to find ways of plugging that gap. But again, just looking at the climate that we were in, they were really limited in terms of the choices that they could have. And this comes through very strongly in the fact that the tax rates in particular were not adjusted, or rather tax rates were not increased, but the tax brackets themselves were worked on, right? Now, in order to plug that gap, again, because of just the limited choices they had to then put in the VAT. They had no choice, unfortunately. Now, and the impact that you then have, as you rightfully pointed out, just more than just the consumers, also in the agricultural sector, particularly for those smallholder and medium-sized farmers who are not VAT registered, who are already contending with escalated input costs. If you think just about how much electricity has increased in the last couple of years, fuel prices, if you consider fertilizer prices, now you've got this added on VAT that will still exacerbate the situation when it comes to other input costs that they're going to be spending on. So definitely, this will definitely have an impact just on the one hand. And if you just think about it, if you consider what you'd normally see with a VAT increase is just the dampening of demand, you would expect that maybe farmers themselves will probably reconsider just how they do business, just based on the elevated cost of doing business when you look at the input costs. However, again, if you just contextualize everything and you look at what the trade-off was for National Treasury, it may not be in the short term, but in the long term, and if you just consider some of the spending that is now earmarked for infrastructure that could be very, very critical for rural areas where the farming community operates. If that is executed efficiently and as it's supposed to be done, that could be recouped in the long run. But I know that's not probably the silver line that a farmer would want to hear in the short term, because they're currently dealing with the situation right now. But it's a very complex one if you consider just everything that is at play. But yeah, I think for the farming community, it will be a strenuous one in the entire climate. But there's some wins that could be gotten or at a later stage along the value chain.
Yeah, I think in as much as the VAT has been increased, the list of VAT exempt has been expanded, and I think we tend to forget that by and large agricultural imports are also VAT exempt by virtue of the rebates. But so what it means for smallholder farmers is that there's a need for compliance to be VAT registered and therefore to be able to qualify for VAT refunds. Because what I suspect will happen is that the Price Monitoring Committee of NAMEC is going to look closely into the price movements of those items that have VAT exempt. So which means that the smallholder farmers are going to struggle to motivate price increases when other commercial farmers who are VAT registered are claiming. So I think it will be in their best interest to ensure that they're VAT registered. I think that's a key to it. But also it is good that the offer is also part of the VAT exemption or VAT exempted aligned items or food items, in that the poultry industry is coming from a hard place. The feed were high, AVI was an issue. So, and we do know the level of demand for the offer, particularly of the poultry products. So, for them to be VAT exempt, I think it will affect the pricing, and also, it may have an impact on the demand. He speaks about the dampening effect of demand, but I think when you take out the VAT exempt, when you exempt those kind of line products, which are in huge demand in rural areas.
For sure.
So I think you are likely to go to boost demand. So on that front. So in as far as the emerging farmers are concerned, I think I would argue that they just need to be compliant. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So you see the VAT interest rates are actually surgical instruments. They cut across and they are immediate. Without mudding what my colleagues have already said, the impact almost counterbalanced by areas where agriculture is impacted. For example, no fuel levy increases, although it benefits everybody, but in agriculture, very, very critical, given that, if you look at the grains sector, closer to about 13% of input costs is fuel. Distribution, planting and so on, heavy reliance on fuel. And especially in infrastructure that we deal with now, where roads have been dilapidated. We have over the years moved from rail to road, and where roads are dilapidated, it means that you've got a continuous rerouting. So your distance gets longer and longer as you avoid roads that are in very bad shape.
Yeah.
So that in itself has added more cost on the operations of in the farming environment. My colleague talked about the fact that some of the inputs are not affected by VAT. Also positive for the agricultural sector, but obviously smallholder where they operate, the whole flood regime increase one way or another, that does affect them, because they've got limited options, and as is indicated, the ability to recoup is also quite limited. There has to be more education in that space to actually have them benefiting. But overall, the benefits come in the long run. The consumer benefits from zero rating, expansion of that list, and obviously, if you drop that 15% on the price already, and you have, let's say, 5% uptick, already you could talk about another 11% drop on probably on price, and obviously that requires a discipline as well, and monitoring of those prices to say how do we monitor policy interventions, and how do we, because that is very critical, that we have that kind of continuous monitoring to say this is the effect that it is having, so that in future when we introduce such instruments, we've got the benefit of history to say this is the impact, and we have been monitoring the impact on both the consumer and producers. What's the behavior of producer where you give this kind of benefit?
Something that has gotten a lot of playtime really is that a lot of people seem to feel like the poor are being punished for government's inability to sort of manage their spending. Do you think there was any room really in the budget, so I assume all of you have actually read the full budget, not just listened to the budget speech, but do you think there was any room for cutting of expenditure? I don't know. Was there?
I think, if I may, so Paul spoke about discipline. And I think the budget needed to demonstrate discipline, particularly for the markets. So the minister needed to demonstrate that the fiscal deficit can be controlled. And I think he did that because it's not getting out of hand. He's continuing on fiscal consolidation. And I think on the day the markets reacted positively. So I think that is where he got it right. Is it a growth budget? I don't think so. But I think in terms on the tax collection side, that was the balancing thing. That was a balancing thing that he needed to do to ensure that the fiscal deficit doesn't get out of hand, and kind of to appease the markets.
Yeah. So talking about the impact on the poor, perhaps let's look at the what you call social responsibility. We had increases on all grants, about 130 for old age, and across the board. And there's this SDR that was a temporary measure. Ordinarily, because it was temporary, under these trying times, from a budget perspective, it would have been something that was withdrawn. But given the understanding of the problem in the country, especially around the poor, that the SDR was retained. So that is that balancing act. On the question of cutting, at least the cry about funds being funneled to non-performing SOEs, this time, there was a pause, which then forces those, performance in those SOEs to say there's no money coming through. Concentrate on core business, concentrate on efficiencies to get your act in order. We already heard about from Transnet saying, look, we're going to dispose of what we don't need, and we're going to concentrate on efficiencies. We're going to concentrate on doing things that are right, and that is positive. So that's on the cutting side. So overall, there was a lot of balancing act around it. But I think what is important is that your commitment to channeling funds towards income generating activities, that was important. But obviously from the minister's side, it is the allocation, but the real activity comes from the department's side. When you receive that money, the manner in which you are going to disperse, what are you going to prioritize and so on, and how do you come up with efficiencies and measurable progress on the items that you have indicated that these funds are going to. It's more critical. Here we've got an overall wish list from the minister to say this is my enabler. Somebody it must be followed by a robust activity, and that must be monitored.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to also commend the National Treasury, because yes, there was no explicit mention of a cut, but the discipline that they've had for the last couple of years is starting to show results, to the point that Paul is mentioning, that there's now not money that's going to a black hole, which is now the state-owned entities. Because National Treasury took a hard stance a couple of years ago, now these state-owned entities have had no choice but to improve. We're seeing ESCOM, yes, we've had a few load shedding episodes more recently, but overall there is great improvement, or significant improvement, that has come from the energy sector. You look at Transnet, they're probably not as efficient as you'd want them to be, but they are on the right track, as well as many other state-owned entities. So I think what we are seeing is just the fruits and the green shoots of a hard stance that was initially taken, but it's starting now to yield results, and that fiscal discipline from National Treasury will, in the long run, start to yield results, and I think the results are coming. So for the lay person who may have seen and did not see the word, we are cutting on explicitly being mentioned, maybe this would be the right time just to note, and it is worth noting, to say, in absence of the explicit mention, the measures and the continuation of that hard stance from National Treasury is actually the cut that we will ultimately realize the benefits thereof in the long run for the entire economy. To what Paul was saying, it's like now we move into income generating activities and less than expenditures that are just wasteful in the country.
And of course, it's not an overnight thing.
Definitely not. No.
So, I mean, who knows how long it's going to take to get to that point where we see actual sort of economic growth. But I think people are if they want something to happen now, and obviously I can understand that we all sort of could wish that we were a rich country, a country where we didn't have so many millions of people who were living in poverty, that we had lots of jobs for people to support their families, etc. But obviously that's not going to happen overnight.
I mean, if you look at the growth forecast, for example, they're already looking on the upward versus the previous trajectory that we've seen, and we've always said the only way this economy is going to recover is through growth. And we are seeing those numbers ticking up slowly but surely, still underperforming greatly, so I will be the first one to admit that, but I think just the growth trajectory is looking much more positive than it did previously in the last 5 years even. So just the hard stance, or just maintaining this kind of positive trajectory, or even doing a bit more, will kick up that growth, and this economy will then benefit. So you'll find the jobs coming from that growth. You'll find cost of living coming from that growth, coming from the economy. So yeah,
I think the stimulative effect of the R1 trillion that has been budgeted for infrastructure can unlock a lot of growth opportunities, and also I think it creates space for the private sector to come in. I think we are already seeing that the private sector is investing quite a lot, I think, on the back of the investor conferences that the president has been hosting. So I think that budget on infrastructure will be quite significant, in, as it says, unlocking growth opportunities.
So it's R1 trillion over a 3-year period, and obviously that will be hugely beneficial to agriculture. I think farmers have been struggling for a long time. Also, of course, exports. We need better port efficiencies, so on. So, how long do you think, just sort of off the top of your head, how long do you think it's going to take for our infrastructure to get to a point where it is actually working towards creating jobs? I mean, how long is it going to take to fix all the roads? How long is it going to take to get the rail system working again? It's a very sort of broad question, but again, it's obviously not going to happen overnight. But how long do you think it will take?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. But starting with, for example, on the logistics, if let's talk Transnet, the move back to rail, the efficiencies that are going to be put in place, allowing them to put efficiencies in place, allowing them to partner with the private sector to get the rails right, to allow private sector participation, getting other partners in the whole value chain, port efficiencies. That is something that is ongoing, and there's even more impetus to actually resolve those issues. So if that can happen within, that can be quick, say 2 years time. We could be back to that, if that environment is actually laid down. Because the other thing is that to attract significant investment from the private sector is about commitment, long-term commitment to get the buy-in from the private sector to actually say we can invest. They are looking at alternatives, and once that is identified, the vehicles to come in, you would see in a turnaround in about 2 years. Also with the roads, it's a question also getting priorities right, and also in a 2-year horizon you might see roads back in shape in areas where they're actually bad, and in most instances, I mean, we're talking about private partnership. If you accelerate it, already we have seen that there were communities and farming communities that had already participated in saying, you know what, we have, we have to do something. So if you take that, combined with government efforts, a lot can be done in a 2-year space to unlock that. And if you overlay what the master plan seeks to do, and individual industry master plans in terms of growth, sorting that out automatically encourages expansions in the various industries, and opening markets and smoothing process of getting produce out of the hinterland to markets. That in itself is a growth effort, and also that in agriculture we can consume so much internally, and which means that the next level of expansion is actually for the export market. So you must actually look at exporting produce. But there's also another spinner, which is your agro processing. That import substitution, reducing our level of of reliance on imported processed food, and actually processing in the country. And in most instances, the benefit will actually go to rural areas where massive production takes place. And if you can unlock that lifeblood, which is logistics, that will take the agricultural contribution of the economy to the next level. We're talking about 14%, by the way, in terms of contribution of agriculture to the agricultural economy. I mean, to the economy in general. I'm not even talking about food processing.
Yeah.
So if we include that, then the contribution of agriculture is even bigger. So that's what we must concentrate on. The coming to the agriculture and allocation. What are the challenges in particular in the department? The big challenges.
It's a good question.
Biosecurity is a big issue.
Yes.
Biosecurity is a big issue. We've got FMD that is not, although endemic to the country, but we know where it should not be. What are the efforts to actually try to contain that? So you require an element of empowerment of the department to actually be able to collaborate with others to actually contain the disease, that it doesn't spread, and also from a development of capacity to produce vaccines for not only FMD, avian influenza, and so on. You need that kind of ability to move expeditiously, to be able to be self-sufficient in terms of production of that, and support the industry in terms of in terms of growth.
First, let's start with the HPL. How beneficial do you think this will be for the sugar industry? Who would like to start?
Well, the benefit is actually, the status quo remains. The only benefit is that there is no increase, so there is no pressure on the industry again.
Oh, additional pressure.
Additional pressure on the industry. So that's quite a relief from an expectation of an increase to the status quo being retained. So so that's the benefit at the moment, and it also provides with more time for the industry to work out programs on their side. But I think what is further needed is the certainty around when the next phase will be, but also whether there's new information that might say it is not necessary to raise the levy or have the levy in the first place. There could be other mechanisms of reduction of consumption of certain of sugary foods. So it gives them that kind of time. But at the moment, there's no mention, which means that automatically there's no increase, because the expectation was that the time period has lapsed
Mm.
and is due for an increase, so there's no increase. But also, there is no certainty as to what will happen in the next year.
Mm.
Is this time period enough, and so on? So there's further engagement that is required to say this particular issue has to be handled.
Mm.
I think so there's I think it's also government commitment to the master plan, the sugar master plan, in that I think they are recognizing the challenges that the industry is facing, and also you remember that at some point government was even considering putting a tax on natural juice, 100% juice,
Mm-hmm.
which was not mentioned. So I think there is a commitment to support the industry.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Sorry.
just broadly speaking as well, I mean, again, to the point my colleague is raising about just the sugar master plan, we know that they now entered the phase 2 of product diversification, and I think how they con that phase is moving away from sugar-based products to more sugar cane kind of products. So now you speak about biofuels and other kind of aviation kind of fuels, but just in the context of what you also mentioned about being a mixed bag of a win and a lose, if you consider what excise duties are, right? So what would be interesting for me is just to understand the thinking around why government continues on the one hand with the wine industry, the beer industry, or the alcohol and beverages industry versus the sugar side of things. Because I know for one, the sugar industry has relied heavily on the NEDLAC report that showed that the HPL is not effective in what government is trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
So I'd be interested to knowing if the same does hold when you look at the alcoholic beverages, because on the one hand, there's an unintended consequence that we need to consider, because on imposing higher duties and levies on the alcoholic and beverages industry, right? It hits on competitiveness, particularly for the wine exporters who are a big player in the global space. So, yeah, it'd just be interesting from a holistic point of view, just to understand if there's an impact or positive impact that government is yielding by having these on the table.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good question. So in terms of alcoholic beverages, I think the increase was 6.75%. Yeah, 6.75%. How do you think that will impact grape growers, wine producers? I've read some comment from industry bodies that are already saying that this is, catastrophic. There could be job losses. It's really not great for the industry. What is your perspective on that?
Exactly that it threatens the viability. On the one hand, if you consider the reason why there's that excise duty, it's to curb the demand or the consumption or the abuse of alcohol. But the industries that are being impacted by these excise duties, are they the ones that are seeing this elevated demand? I could argue maybe to the contrary, that maybe it's not the wine consumers that are for one, they're consuming so much of the wine that you really need to cut down on that. And but yeah, so I mean, it's definitely going to be a challenge for the sector. And I mean, if you look at just the gravitas and the magnitude, the quantum thereof, it's 6.75. That's significantly higher than inflation.
Yeah.
So at what point do you say what is reasonable and can it be lower if they wanted really to increase it? Sure.
100%. Yeah. And then I think finally, in terms of, there's so much more we could talk about, but land reform in particular and farmer support, what is the allocation that's been made to that? Do you think that's enough? Do you think it's significant enough, if assuming that it's going to be used for the purpose that it's been allocated? Is it significant enough to actually make a difference in terms of land reform in South Africa?
I think details will come in when the minister presents his own budget. Then you will begin to see his focus areas as a new minister from outside the ANC to run the portfolio. And yeah, so I think in as far my reading is that there's still a lot of things that needs to be cleared in as far as the allocation, firstly to the sector, but also to land reform. Yeah.
I don't think money allocation in itself is not the only solution. There's also support that needs to come with all of that. So you can, if the money is channeled towards support post allocation of land and land reform in that sense, then we'll probably see an impact thereof. But as it stands, I think, as my colleague is pointing out, we still need to understand the detail, the strategy, and what more will be done over and above just the allocation that has come through.
Well, the breakdown of what that support means, and the modus operandi, is it going to change? We have had the same thing over time. Is there going to be a change this time? So, money aside, it will be critical. Obviously, backed by a new program, a new way of doing things, backed by money, will bring about confidence. Timers, access to support. What are the farmers? If you set up farmers, is the support going to be coming at the right time, upfront? If we get to know that, then we can have confidence that there is a shift in the process of reforms. But if it is going to be, we receive so much funds, we are going to, do this and this and that. That doesn't say much. The actual breakdown of exactly what is going to be done.
Correct.
What are the focus areas? And it must all be about the farmer. It must all be about the farmer. If that happens, then we can talk about something different in the next phase of accelerated support for farmers, and everybody will come on board, knowing that government is coming on board. Because most of the time, partners are left in the lurch when it comes to certain programs of government. Sometimes they're crafted and still need to be reworked. And when the realities come in, you've got a protracted delay in implementation of such programs. If that is addressed, then we could be doing something else in the next few years.
Yeah, I guess the bottom line with anything in the budget really is, you can allocate whatever you want to whatever you want. But the bottom line is how it's implemented and how the ministries that get the money spend it. Is it spent on the right stuff or the things that it has been allocated for, so on and so forth. And obviously that will only become apparent in the months to come. Thank you so very much for joining me today. Thank you for giving me your time. I know you're all very, very busy, so we really appreciate having you here. And I think you've offered some very valuable insights, so thank you very, very much.